Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, now, a short time ago, I sat down with Jeremy Hunt at his official residence in London's Carlton Gardens. We discussed his ambition to be Prime Minister, more of that in a moment. But first, in his current role as Foreign Secretary, I asked him first why the Chinese ambassador had been summoned to the Foreign Office today.
Well, we're very concerned at the reaction in China to comments that I made, which were very straightforward, which is that we want to be the best of friends with China, we want to trade with China, but we expect all countries that we have internationally binding agreements with to honour those agreements. And we had an agreement between Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping back in 1984 that protected the freedoms of the people in Hong Kong. And we stand foursquare behind that agreement. That's all I'm saying.
That agreement, the Chinese simply don't reference anymore.
Well, they need to, because it was an agreement that lasted 50 years. It was a very inspired agreement. It allowed the transfer of Hong Kong back to China. And my point is really this. The great success of Hong Kong, one of the greatest cities in the world, is based on the business acumen of the people of Hong Kong, but also the basic freedoms that have been protected. And, you know, the United Kingdom wants to ensure that what was agreed to back in 1984 is honoured for those 50 years.
But you have no means of enforcing it.
Well, we are a serious country in the world, and the point we're making is very simply that if that agreement between the United Kingdom and China was not honoured, then there would be serious consequences. Of course there would be.
You've been accused of making inappropriate remarks yourself by the Chinese.
Well, I've been actually very reasonable with the Chinese. I'm someone who believes that we should be the best of friends with China. I want us to trade with China. I want to have the best possible understanding between two of the great countries in the world.
Should you not actually have dispatched your junior minister immediately to China? Should you not have gone yourself?
Well, we sent the very strongest signal when we had these demonstrations in Hong Kong.
But diplomacy is about face-to-face, getting in there and saying, stop.
Well, I got out there and I made it clear that Britain, one of the oldest democracies in the world, is standing foursquare behind the agreement that we reached with China over the future of Hong Kong. And that is an internationally binding legal agreement. And I couldn't have been clearer that we expect all sides to respect that agreement.
You say there are going to be serious consequences if the Chinese don't change their tack. What are those consequences?
Well, as Foreign Secretary, it's not smart diplomacy to outline what such consequences might be ahead of the situation that you're going to need them. You have to have some strategic ambiguity. But I wanted to make the point that we are watching the situation in Hong Kong very closely. We do consider that 1984 agreement to be legally binding, and that is why there would be those serious consequences if it were ever to be breached.
And you know what the Chinese are saying in response? He seems to be fantasising in the faded glory of British colonialism and in the bad habit of gesticulating while looking down on other countries' affairs. They don't seem to think much of your threats.
Well, all I would say is that I am a supporter of a great friendship between the UK and China, but that means we have to honour the agreements that we have with each other.
But when you talk of honour, you have to be honest. To be honest, we do not have any real mechanism for meaningful consequences.
John, we are a great country. We have a lot of influence in the world, and China would like a good relationship with the UK. We would like a good relationship with China, but we have to honour the agreements we've made with each other.
There are some enormous challenges on your desk as Foreign Secretary at the moment. You have today these ghastly scenes coming out of Libya after the bombing of a camp in which migrants are being held. Scores of people have been killed. Now, that policy of having Libya contain migrants in those camps, i.e. stop the flow, we're, with the rest of the EU, bound in that decision.
Well, we are not bound in the decision to bomb those camps.
No, we're bound in the decision to have those people arrested and stopped. But our responsibility can't just stop there. You can't say, stop these people, arrest them, and then have no responsibility for what happens to them. These people have been killed.
John, with respect, what happened is utterly appalling. But the responsibility for the bombing of a camp with innocent people in it lies with the people who perpetrated this atrocity, and we have been the country that at the United Nations has been working for a ceasefire. We don't believe there's a military solution possible in Libya. We want the two parties to get together. I met the Prime Minister of Libya in Downing Street, and I gave that very same message to him, that he too needs to compromise so that we can stop these terrible things happening.
But this is incredible. You say, and indeed you pay the Libyans to stop these people coming into the Mediterranean and going across. And then you say that's where our responsibility ends. No, we have a moral responsibility for what happens after we've paid them to stop these people.
Well, we do have a responsibility, John, because we were part of the international coalition that removed Gaddafi, and there is still a very unstable situation in Libya.
That's taking us a long way away from the camps. What is our responsibility?
No, it's not,
it is.
because the situation with migration is also caused by the instability in the political situation in Libya. And Britain has been working night and day to try and get a ceasefire so that we can avoid the kind of terrible atrocities that we've seen today. And that is what my team at the Foreign Office work extremely hard on.
This migrant crisis is worldwide, and it's expressed in the southern states of the United States. And we have seen too, in the last 2 days, these terrible images of refugees in dreadful conditions, migrants who've tried to cross the border. Mexico's been paid to stop them, rather similar to Libya, and they are in disgusting conditions. Children who have been 30 days without a bath of any description, covered in their own feces. You've seen the pictures. This is our best friend, as you call the United States. It isn't good enough. What are you saying to them?
Well, we share the concerns that many people have about these images. We also note that President Trump has signed an executive order on the 1st of July to release funding to deal with those conditions. And, this is a matter of American domestic policy, but as a human being, we hope they're sorted out as quickly as possible.
We've got a huge diplomatic presence in the United States. We've got people monitoring what's going on there. You've known about this for several weeks, maybe a month, I don't know.
We don't agree with everything that President Trump does, but I do agree with him when he says that the alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States is the greatest in history.
Which therefore allows you to say to him,
yes,
will you get your house in order and stop this terrible situation?
Well, he is doing that, and that is why he signed that executive order. But when I stood with him at the D-Day commemorations just a few weeks ago, that, I think, reminded all of us that the last 75 years has been an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. And that alliance between the UK and the USA has been at the heart of that, and I defend that to the hilt.
Now, of course, in the last few months, if we turn now to Brexit, a very large number of Conservatives have moved over to voting for the Brexit party. Do you want them back?
Yes, I do. And the way we will get them back, and the way I will get them back as Prime Minister, is to deliver Brexit. There is no other way. And that means being prepared to do a no-deal Brexit. I don't think there's a big difference between me and Boris Johnson in that respect. The difference is whether we choose the person who is most likely to be able to negotiate a deal, which means that we don't have to have all the difficult consequences of a no-deal Brexit. And as someone who is a negotiator, an entrepreneur by background, I think I'm the person who is most likely to get us that deal that allows an orderly Brexit.
It's been a very divisive matter for your own persona, hasn't it? I mean, if we look at your campaign, let's look at you during the referendum campaign. You campaigned to remain, and you were a fervent Remainer. I want Britain's voice to be strong in the world, and we believe we'll be better off and more secure by remaining. You still believe that?
No, I think we can make a tremendous success.
What happened to that
of
chap?
Brexit. I'll tell you. 2 reasons. First of all, one of my concerns about Brexit in that campaign was the short-term impact on the economy. We had lots of projections
that we'd have right now.
Well, actually, we had projections, if you remember, in that campaign that there would be an immediate slump in house prices. We'd have to have emergency cuts to public spending. None of that materialised. The economy turned out to be much more robust. But the second reason, John, is I am like millions of people who voted Remain, who just want to get on and deliver Brexit. Because we're Democrats.
That's not quite, no, that's not quite how you put it at the time.
You've got to let me finish because it's very important. One thing that has happened between now and when I said those words is that this country voted to leave the European Union. And when I go around the world as Foreign Secretary, people have actually a whole lot more respect for us than we sometimes have for ourselves.
Gosh, and try being a journalist.
Well,
the stuff we find as we go around the world is really embarrassing. They think we've lost it.
Well, just let me answer the question. They have more respect for us than we have for ourselves, primarily because they look at us as one of the oldest and greatest democracies in the world. And they are looking now to see whether, when you have this Brexit decision that much of the political establishment didn't want, do we actually have the courage to implement it? And
so look,
yes, I want to answer your question because you asked me about how they look at us now. And yes, they look at Brexit paralysis and they say this is not like the Britain we know. But they don't say you can't make a success of Brexit. They just want us to get on with it.
OK, well, let's look at what your solution was on the 28th of June 2016, just after the referendum. We need to negotiate a deal, put it to the British people, either in a referendum or through the Conservative manifesto at a fresh general election. Do you still believe that?
We had that general election. And in that election, and the argument...
I'm sorry, no, that is not the order of events. You said negotiate a deal and then put it to the British people. We had not negotiated a deal.
No.
When is the election? When is the referendum?
Will you let me answer the question, John?
Go ahead.
Thank you. That article was written, I think, about a week after the referendum result. And what I was saying is that there is a decision to leave the European Union, but we have not, as a country, voted on the shape of Brexit that we want.
You used the word deal.
Let me finish, if you don't mind. So we had a general election a year later in which 80% of the country voted for parties that wanted to leave the single market and, in fact, leave the customs union. So we've had that democratic endorsement of the type of Brexit we want. And
it's
now
not
what the country wants...
It's not what you said.
I'm afraid
it
is, John.
Negotiate a deal. We had not negotiated a deal. If you're going to tell me we had negotiated a deal, I simply don't think we're living on the same planet.
Well, the argument I was making couldn't have been simpler. There needs to be democratic endorsement of the type of Brexit we want. We have that endorsement, and now I, like millions of people who voted for Remain, want to get on and deliver it.
If you want to excuse yourself, but you have changed your tack pretty remarkably.
Because you may have noticed that we had a referendum result in which the majority of people in the country voted to leave. But the statements I've read to you are after the referendum. 1 week after, John.
What about being honest about the economic impact of it all?
I think I've been very honest. I've been very clear.
So you agree with the Governor of the Bank of England and with the Chancellor of the Exchequer that it's going to be at least 90 billion?
Well, I think the Governor of the Bank of England has said that it could be perhaps slightly less, but on the scale of the recession that we had after the financial crisis of 2008. And that's why I want to prepare to mitigate against that in every way possible.
My God, nobody wants to revisit 2008. I mean, after all, austerity came and the poorest people in the country had to pay for the banking crisis. That you wouldn't deny.
That was a terrible recession, and that's why I want to negotiate a deal.
You say you're going to serve under Mr. Johnson if he wins. Is that simply because you want to stay in power either way?
I think after this election, what the people of this country want is the Conservative Party and the Conservative government to come together to find a solution to the biggest constitutional crisis that we've had in my lifetime. So if I win, I very much hope that Boris will be part of my team, and if he wins, I would be more than happy to be part of his team.
And why do you think he's morally fit to be Prime Minister?
Well, that's a question you must ask him.
No, you're the man who has to serve him if he wins.
Well, it's not my job to make comments about the moral character of my opponents, and I think it would demean the competition if... Indeed, I think I'm the better candidate to be Prime Minister, but that doesn't mean I have to make comments about his moral character.
Are you morally better than him?
I don't think it helps this contest, and I don't think it's what the people of the Conservative Party want if we start making comments about each other's moral fibre. We're sitting in the grand apartments in which he inhabited just before you. Do you leave anything interesting behind? Not particularly, no. Well, anything? No, it was all cleaned up very nicely before we arrived. He needed it? Well, you'll have to ask the Foreign Office cleaners. Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for talking to us.
Well, is Britain likely to be walking tall again if Jeremy Hunt becomes Prime Minister? With me here are international editor Lindsay Hilsum and our business editor Siobhan Kennedy. Lindsay, first, let's return to the top story. How unusual is it for China's ambassador to the UK to be summoned into the Foreign Office, or any ambassador indeed?
Well, ambassadors do get summoned in, but for the Chinese ambassador to get summoned is very unusual because Britain, has just been said, is rather sort of declining colonial power. China is the rising superpower. Its economy is 6 times as big and getting bigger. And Britain says very little these days about Tibet, about human rights in general in China. But Hong Kong is different because of the handover, because people in Hong Kong do still look to Britain. They do still feel an attachment and they do want the support of Britain. And actually, that puts the Foreign Secretary in an extremely difficult situation. He knows perfectly well that we have very little power compared to China. And yet people in Hong Kong do expect Britain to stand up for them when it comes to issues of human rights and democracy.
And how significant is the timing of this in the middle of this race to become the next Prime Minister?
Well, obviously it's significant in the sense that, Hong Kong has just seen the largest demonstrations probably ever. So that's very important. But, when you look at the race between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, it seems that they're trying to out-macho each other. And so I think there is pressure on the Foreign Secretary to be particularly, how shall I put it, robust in his statements on these issues. But I suppose one could also say that so far, he's the one who's been man enough to come onto Channel 4 News and answer John's very difficult questions about foreign policy.
Well, Siobhan, foreign policy, Jeremy Hunt's day job, has been taking up quite a lot of his time, but he's also made quite a smattering of financial promises, hasn't he?
He has. With all those pressing foreign issues today, there wasn't that much room to analyse his economic promises thus far. But just like Boris Johnson, we know that there is a rapidly growing list of tax cuts and spending pledges that he's making on a daily basis. But as that list is growing, some people put his list at £65 billion, by the way. As that list is growing, though, Kathy, so too is the cynicism about the costings behind those pledges and whether or not the numbers add up. One thing to note in John's interview there, Mr. Hunt appeared to play down the Chancellor's warning this week that the long-term cost to the economy of a no deal could be around £90 billion. Mr. Hunt appeared to play that down a little bit, said it could be less, but he knows that if we leave in a disorderly way, have a hard no-deal Brexit, that the cost to the economy will be hefty. And that is why the pledges, the economic pledges and promises he's making today matter. So I went earlier today to his constituency to see what the locals had to say about his promises so far.
It's farming, Surrey style, a stately home with well-padded, pasture-fed cows, destined for British plates. But even here, they chew over the perils of a no-deal Brexit.
We can't go on with life with this uncertainty and with a no deal. British farming spends its life exporting, and especially into Europe. No deal is really bad news for British farming. I think it would be, yeah.
Farmers like Bill know that no deal would likely mean an end to EU subsidies and the imposition of tariffs. That's why Jeremy Hunt, one of the local MPs in this affluent corner of Surrey, is promising a £6 billion lifeline for farming and fisheries if we crash out of the EU.
Good to hear. We have no detail on it yet, and we're also pretty sure that's going in a lot of different pies.
So it won't necessarily cover the farmer pain?
Absolutely right, yeah.
Is that the worry?
I think that's the concern, the main concern, yeah.
Jeremy Hunt's leadership sweeteners are fast stacking up. Along with the £6 billion for farmers and fishermen, there's also £13 billion pledged to cut corporation tax, a promise to raise the threshold for national insurance contributions. That could cost £11 billion or more, £1 billion to reduce interest on student loans, and a future commitment to raise defence spending. Pledges which all up could cost between £40 and £65 billion.
Everyone loves the promise of a spending splurge, and even here in this affluent Surrey town, the high street isn't immune from the wider economic challenges. Shops here are shutting just as they are up and down the country. But just like Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt is hoping his tax cuts and spending bonanza will appeal to the Tory party voters. But they too can hear the loud chorus of people criticising his financial plans. Not just the opposition, but his own Chancellor too.
Philip Hammond has said his 26 billion treasure chest would be soaked up immediately and then some if we leave Europe with no deal, never mind having any cash left over for giveaways. And there's scepticism in Mr Hunt's constituency too.
I have to say he's my preferred candidate, but I don't trust any of them on fiscal matters.
Don't believe any of them anymore.
Why?
Oh, because it's just all a nonsense now, isn't it? It's just one lie after another.
We don't know who to believe. I just think we just need to get this done. That's the thing.
Brexit done?
Yeah.
Labour, meanwhile, is enjoying a rare opportunity to accuse the Tories of largesse, particularly another proposed cut in corporation tax.
We've not seen the increase in investment that was promised to be a result from corporation tax. Actually, we've just seen the government's coffers getting smaller, and it's incredibly irresponsible for Jeremy Hunt to be making those kinds of pledges, as indeed Boris Johnson has been as well.
Both candidates are promising big spending to lure the party faithful. But the truth is, it's not the bungs, but Brexit they care about. And on that, Jeremy Hunt knows Boris Johnson is on much firmer footing.
And just to let you know, the other Conservative leadership candidate, Boris Johnson, has also agreed to do an interview with us. We're just waiting for him to set a date.
You come and interview me later.
I'd love to. Is that an official invite?
It is.